Welcome to Leadership in 3D. This is a webcast that brings on a couple specialists in a given theme field to help share with us three simple tips and keys in their specialty to help us level up quicker. So over the next 45 to 55 minutes, you're going to have an opportunity to gain a lot of knowledge from a special themed topic that you may not normally get in your day-to-day. And so I'm really excited to share with you a few of the speakers that we have here today. Today's theme is on the LGBTQ community. Queer Me is what our theme is today. How do we create inclusivity in our leadership in a very divisive world? And it was interesting as I was brainstorming the topic for today. I typically find my specialists before we come up with the title. And there's a lot of different directions that we can go today, and probably will. And I hope so. All in and on around allyship as well as leadership when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the workplace and also in society at large. How do we navigate a very divisive time, specifically in and on and around our queer brothers and sisters and the like, right? So today we're really going to be jumping in and getting some really cool perspectives and techniques and thoughts on how we all can be more inclusive, not only for ourselves, but for those around us. So I want to briefly thank and welcome my two guests here today. Shane and Matthew come in as two gurus in the queer world, mainly from my experience, and the two of you can correct me if I'm wrong as we get into your presentations today, mainly in the transition period between the moment in which I am gaining information about my career through college and the university and then launching into the professional world. And so they both come from phenomenal organizations that they have developed and nurtured over time, and we're going to get to know a little bit about them and what they've created. My challenge to them today is going to be, in 10 minutes or less, you've got to basically boil down three of the biggest points that you can possibly make about the queer world and inclusivity and whatever your perspective is on becoming a better leader in the world in general, whether you are a queer person or an ally. All right, so that is the challenge. I will be going at the very end, giving our additional leadership spin on top of what my two fantastic presenters have. Today, I want to start by introducing my first guest. Shane comes in as a best-selling author of the first ever college guide profiling the 100 best LGBT-friendly campuses, which I think is really important for those who are allies. We're going to be talking about why being a member of the societal tribe is so important, and that we've got to find our own unique small niche tribes. And I really feel like, Shane, that you have taken, I can't even imagine how much data to be able to compile what you've done with the 100 best LGBT-friendly campuses. He is a LGBTQ campus pioneer, a founder and executive director of Campus Pride. He has developed what is called the Campus Pride Index, and perhaps you can share a little bit about what that is, Shane. He lives in Charlotte, North Carolina with his husband. A beautiful story, and I'm just so excited about all the wealth of information and experience you have to share with us here today. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Shane Windmeyer.
Awesome. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here over your lunchtime and to share a few of the key takeaways that I've learned about leadership. As mentioned, I am the executive director of Campus Pride. Campus Pride works with about 1,400 different colleges across the country when it comes to creating safe spaces, helping build future leaders. And these leaders are LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, intersex, asexual, the whole spectrum of gender and sexuality, as well as our wonderful heterosexual allies, our straight people. So we work with all types of leaders and all intersections of identity. So when we're talking about queer people, we're talking about queer people of color, we're talking about queer people of different religions and faiths, different abilities. And so we have to keep in mind those intersections when we talk about leadership and when we talk about being queer. I think that's very important. And we also have to remember that queer people are fabulous and amazing people, and we should be always celebrating who we are as queer people. So don't forget that. So I've been doing this work for, oh my goodness, over 2 decades now. I think I am the oldest person on today's today's webinar. And next year, Campus Pride will be celebrating our 20-year anniversary. Yes, our 20-year anniversary. And we're super excited about that. So I want to get started with our first key takeaway about leadership, which is about leadership comes from the power within. And so if we can go ahead and bring up that first point for the key takeaway, leadership comes from the power within. Now, I don't know about all of you, but when I was a young person, one of the biggest struggles is understanding who you are, understanding your identity, understanding your queerness, how you identify. And for some of us, that is a challenge, being queer and coming out. And also reconciling our other intersections of identity. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, we aren't just queer. We are, we have a faith, our religion, or maybe we are, atheist, but we have a spiritual identity. We have a racial makeup, our cultural background, our gender. And for queer people, including trans and non-binary people, that process can last our entire lifetime as far as our transition, our exploration of identity. Some people think that once you get put in a box as far as identity, that somehow you have found out who you are and you're ready to move forward. And, that's not as simple. Identity doesn't move necessarily in a forward motion. Sometimes it's cyclical. And we think about identity in different ways. But that leadership, that component of leadership that I'm talking about, once you're able to affirm yourself as a leader, especially as a queer person, the work that we've done with Campus Pride is that you're able to be a stronger leader. Your power comes from recognizing who you are and your uniqueness, and what you have to offer the world. And sometimes offering the world isn't just about your queerness. Sometimes it's about your culture, your background. I know for myself, exploring what it was like, growing up, part of the Iowa tribe, my native indigenous, background was real important to me. As someone who was assimilated as part of my native culture, growing up on the reservation, my mom working on the reservation, I had to really seek out that part of my cultural identity to better understand that. And I also had to seek out what it meant to be gay or queer, in college. And so it wasn't until I was able to really embrace my Catholicism, my native indigenous ancestry, understanding that along with my Mexican, being a third generation, immigrant, thinking about all those intersections is what made me powerful, or continues to make me, I should say, powerful as a leader. And so you really need to recognize that leadership, really comes from within your power, recognizing your privilege, how you have opportunities to help others with your privilege, and recognizing what power you have to make a difference. The next one I think is another key takeaway and concept is that you define you. Don't let anyone define who you are. Don't let them put you in a box, right? Don't let them slap a label on you like a soup can, right? You define you. And that's so important when we talk about leadership, is really owning. And we didn't talk about this when I was a young person, but like this whole idea that you have a brand. I'm not really sold on the idea that people have brands. I think it's a little sterile sounding, but you have your identity, you have who you are, you define who you are. And don't ever forget that. I think sometimes we all get stuck in this mode of we have to come across a certain way on social media, or we have to project a certain image. Ultimately, you're in charge of that. And, it needs to be authentic. It needs to be real. Don't put on a show, just be who you are and define yourself. And I think that's so important for leaders today, because we have this mode of leadership which comes across as very inauthentic or not real when it comes to our emotions, when it comes to our mental health, our own self-care. And so define who you are. Don't let other people do that. I think it's an essential component to being a leader. And when you make mistakes, because you will, right, own those mistakes and let those mistakes help define who you are. And don't don't allow someone, because I've had this happen in my own life, where you make a mistake. Maybe you're in the media, people put words and associate words with you. Don't let that hurt your spirit. Don't let that get in the way of you being a strong leader. It's very easy to do. And the last one, the key takeaway that I want to talk about in my time today, is that it's okay not to be okay. I think especially when it comes to our own mental health, our spiritual health, our identity of being queer, there's not one way to be queer. There are many ways to be fabulous. And I think queerness is about who you are, and realizing that who you are sometimes means that there's days where you're not always, happy, or, celebrating, that you're reflective, or that you're emotional. And I don't think we create enough space as leaders to really take care of ourselves and allow us to take a moment to reflect, take a moment to, deal with more emotions than just, being on and being a leader. Leadership is about failure. You cannot be successful without failing. And that has been, I think, in my, time coming out in, the mid 90s till today, I've failed many times. And the reason why I've been able to succeed is because I was willing to explore and reflect, and not let, depression or issues that have challenged me get in the way of me being, coming back and trying to strive for success. And I think that's so important as a leader. And, those would be, for myself at least, 3 key takeaways today that I would really encourage you to do. And never forget that, queerness is about, being comfortable with who you are, but also understanding that you have a great ability and responsibility in your power to help other people who are queer, who maybe come after you. So don't ever forget that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane. I have a couple of questions for you, and if you have any questions for Shane, this would be a great opportunity to chat those in. But one for me, for you, would be, what was one of the most impactful events of your life? No, there's a big question, but I think we all like stories, and I like that we can all learn from each other's impact. What would you say is the most impactful event that you've experienced?
So as a leader, I think my most impactful event that I've experienced would be my relationship with activism, and the fact that I have been an activist in so many different modes of, being a protester, right? And the importance of protest and getting in people's faces and being an agitator, to, the mode of activism where I have kind of stepped back and met and had conversation and compromised as a leader. And I think that has been really pivotal. And so, like, my story with, with Chick-fil-A, and my work with Campus Pride to protest the company, and then it leading to actually sitting down and having conversation. I think that that's real important, because most of the times what we see and what we hear about is the protest and the very important activist of being a leader and being, making sure your voice is heard. But what we don't see, and what's not really that exciting or maybe sexy on social media, is the idea of actually sitting down and talking about your differences, not giving in or conceding in any way, but just talking about, okay, you feel this way, I feel that way. What common ground do we have? And I think that's the aspect of leadership that's missing in politics and in some of our, what we consider to be leadership today.
It's fascinating. So I did a lot of my studies in film production. And one of the biggest things they teach you got to have a pivotal moment of conflict, because something about the human experience is that we love conflict, right? But the conflict must have a resolution also in this story. And that's what we look for, is before I walk out of that theater, is there some point of resolution? And what I'm hearing from you just really plays to that whole dialogue and that narrative, that we love to see the conflict. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. And it's actually even necessary in many situations. and we can all look at that in different perspectives, but necessary, but we love watching it, but less sexy is that resolution, but we still need that as a society.
Well, we do. And that's why if you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, and we all say it's like a reality show, but just, it's produced. And so there's always a conflict and then there's always a resolution. And that's what people live for. And we even see it play out in what we call media today. And that's the big danger, I think, of media, is this idea that, oh, we have to have a conflict, and then because they want viewers, they have to show resolution. So this media isn't about just reporting anymore, which it used to be when I was, real young, right? It was about, oh, you always felt like, oh, they were just reporting the news. Well, no, now it's about telling stories and about creating conflict, I think, whether it be in print media, video, television, whatever it is. And you're exactly right. And I think that's the big concern I have about really the future, is like, when does news become a story that you're fabricating or that you're producing, as opposed to just telling the way things happen?
And I think we as society, we crave the information, the raw information. So we're kind of at a dichotomy, is like, we like to be entertained, but that's now muddled with information, and how to tease those apart is challenging.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. And there's some people writing about that, but I don't know. I mean, media capitalism has its pluses and minuses, right? And one of the things we learn in periods like today is that capitalism is great when everyone's making money, right? But when people aren't making money, then we turn to more socialism, in that we're helping people, we're bailing out companies. Like, that's not capitalism. Capitalism would say everyone should fail, right? Same way with the media, right? The media would be, well, we just report the facts, but media is looking at creating money, and the only way they can create money is creating viewers. And so it's very cyclical. But I think as leaders, getting this back to your topic, we have to be critical, and we have to think about why things are the way they are, and really know our history. Because a lot of today's young people, they're only taught history by what they see in their little bubble in social media, right? And so we really have to dig out of that bubble, I think.
One final question, if I may. In a framework of leadership as an activist, what do you see is the number one quality as an activist leader? If you were to look at other leaders out there and be able to pick out, like, ooh, that person is a solid leader. And I'm putting on the framework of an activist leader, but you can tease those apart if you'd like. But if you were to pick up in a lineup and say, bam, that person has that quality, they're going to be a great leader, or they are a great leader, what would you say?
Wow, that's a great question. And it's one that isn't just one answer, I don't think. So I use the word transformational leader, right? Like, transformation, I think, is so important in leadership. And I think activist is another great word to put with leadership. But I would say perseverance, not giving up. That's what I would, if I had to pick one thing, I would say a successful leader is someone who perseveres, who doesn't give up.
Love it. Thank you so much. Again, Shane, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to keep you around to the very end. Ladies and gentlemen, you should see a pop-up if you're here live that will direct you to Campus Pride. You can check out more information about what Shane is doing, has done, and also his line of impactful speakers that you can bring into your own organization to continue on the movement. So thank you so much, Shane, for having you here.
Sure.
Fantastic.
It's great to be here.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
All right, fantastic. I want to bring in our next presenter here. Our next presenter is Matthew French. Him and I met just recently on his podcast, opportunity to share a little bit about leadership and what he is doing. He has branched out to create authentically awesome. I'm hearing double voice. Hold on. I had to technically change how I'm hearing the audio, because I'm not getting the audio through one speaker. I'm getting it only through both ears at different rates. So Matthew French here has had over 10 years in the queer inclusion and activism community as well. 8 years in higher education in placing students into work environments that were most conducive for them, as well as instructing businesses on how to diversify and become more queer friendly. Matthew, I'm so excited to have you on here today. I know that you bring in this 90s twist with your branding here today, as well as your style, which I love it, because I'm a child of the 80s, which means I actually really experienced the 90s. Matthew French, I'm excited to hear what awesome point, or pun intended here, what awesome points you have to share with us here today. So ladies and gentlemen, Matthew French.
Thank y'all for having me today. So yeah, I'm super excited to kind of share Awesomely Authentic and things that I've learned in the recruitment and retention of queer people within companies and organizations. So that's kind of the first bullet point I want to start with today. When you look at the recruitment and retention of queer people in companies, expanding out their recruitment pools, what I've really found is when you're looking at D&I, so diversity and inclusion, or DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, what you really find is that there's a overwhelming response of not looking specifically at queer people. There are companies out there that are doing really well, I think, around recruiting and really going for those talent pools of LGBTQ plus job seekers. But the vast majority still have not really jumped on and looked at queer people as part of their D&I or DEI efforts. Part of that for me is what I've noticed is companies have a bottom line, and that bottom line, part of it now, I think, includes that inclusion piece and that diversity piece, but they're not gathering data on their queer employees or queer people who may be applying to their positions. There's a lot of debate of well, why does an employer need to know that information? But you think about an employer application, you're already telling them, you can opt in if you want to tell them your race, you can opt in if you want to tell them about your disability, you can opt in if you want to tell them about your veteran status. So what I really am standing for with Awesomely Authentic when I work with employers is I really want them to think about that and start expanding out gender identity just past male and female to include the spectrum of identities. That's information they can have people opt in, and it will really allow them to help support the people that are working in their organization more, but then also to reflect and look and see at their talent pools and if they are getting queer people to apply to their applications. I think, I've seen some great companies like, Ally Financial is a really great example of the way that they're working with, organizations like Campus Pride. They have amazing ERGs. They really get out in the community. And then companies like Netflix, if you want to check out their job application, it actually allows people to opt in on their sexual orientation or their gender identity, giving a list of all these different identities that they could possibly host. Again, the important part that I really want to push home is it's not forcing people to give that information, but it's allowing employees and applicants to see that first initial contact of being like, this company sees me. This company understands that there are multiple identities that I would like to maybe bring to work. And that's what I'm really trying to push and trying to educate employers on, is my goal is to have sexual orientation and the plethora of gender identities listed on job applications for people to opt in. So if you are a recruiter or you're working at your company right now, take a look at your applications, see what the application process looks like, and think about it through a lens of a trans person or a person who is non-binary or a person who is gay or lesbian or bisexual, and think about how much it would mean to know that your identity is valued enough where they actually ask you that question. So that way the employer can provide support, but then also so employers can look at their talent pools and be like, oh, we're not getting nowhere near as many queer people to apply as we would like. So we need to look at our diversity and inclusion efforts. So that way we can go work more with youth development programs, LGBT centers, focus more on LGBTQ student orgs, work with organizations like Campus Pride. So there's all these different things that really come into that recruitment part, but then also the retention piece. So having that application first, I think is a great part, but then really working on the retention. So making sure that your space is safe for all of your employees. It's not saying that you can control everyone's thoughts or feelings about queer people, but it's educating them that in this space, you will respect queer people. You will respect LGBTQ people as a coworker and as a human being in this space. The next part that I really want to hit on is the intersectionality of employees. And, Shane did a perfect job speaking through all of the different parts that make us who we are through intersectionality, right? So it's interesting how we each pick these parts of our intersectionality that we talk about. I am a gay, white, cisgender male, so I have privilege that comes with being white, with being cisgendered, but also within the LGBTQ plus community, I have privileges of being a gay male, right? I feel larger society is still very much so in the, gay white male perspective. You see this changing through some media images, but overall it's still heavily white gay males. I mean, even looking at Drag Race, there's a lot of talk about Drag Race where it's really focused on, in the most popular queens that people have deemed as the most popular tend to be white gay males dressed up in drag. But I digress. But when you think about the intersectionality of your employees, it's important that even if you cannot measure queer people who currently work at your organization, your institution, your company, you still need to do diversity and inclusion efforts around that, because I want to set up something like a possibility, a vignette, if you will. So if you have done all this inclusion work around race, around gender, but then let's say you have a Black female who identifies as lesbian, right? So those looking at those intersections, what if that same employee who feels welcome based on their gender as a female, who feels welcome based on their race as a Black woman, but what if they then experience things internally, they see things on Glassdoor about your company that's not inclusive of their lesbian identity? So what you're essentially doing is, if you have not done efforts to really integrate queer people into your D&I efforts and your educational efforts, is you're basically wiping the slate of like, oh, only certain parts of your identity are okay, which I think can lead to, dissatisfaction. There's been a lot of research that's shown that if you work through D&I efforts and you create an inclusive space, it helps with your bottom line, but it also helps your employees be more productive. So I would really encourage you to think outside of just the D&I perspective of numbers you can measure, and look at the whole intersectionality of your employees to make sure you're really fostering and caring for each of those identities. The last point that I really want to hit on is the practicing allyship in the workplace, and I want to give you a couple of quick takeaways. So the one thing that I would really encourage you to do right now is look at your Zoom profile, look at your LinkedIn, look at your email signature, and add in those gender pronouns. So I go by he, him, his gender pronouns, but you can also go by she, her, hers, they, them, theirs. There are a plethora of pronouns to go by, and this is a great signifier to others, especially trans, non-binary people, that you are at least aware of gender pronouns and you're working on that educational process, right? So it's all about educating, it's all about growing. And so one of the fastest ways to immediately do something to demonstrate inclusion to queer people is adding in those gender pronouns into your digital profiles all around. Another thing that I'd also really, encourage you to do is, if you do not see any queer programming happening, queer education, D&I efforts, if you don't have an employee resource group for queer people, I really, really encourage you to get that conversation going at your company, at your organization. Bring up the conversation. It's really important to do that, so that way you can continue to build that inclusive community at your workplace. And it's also a great way to build skill sets for yourself of stepping outside of the box and speaking up for those who maybe cannot speak. For example, 50% of queer people still fear coming out at work. So you could be that voice for them as an ally or as an out queer person at work who can help speak up for those people who maybe don't feel completely comfortable coming out. So I really encourage you to be that voice and to help bring queer people more into the spectrum of D&I efforts. Awesomely Authentic, we try to do that with a lot of our presentations, but I also think it's a community group effort where D&I is something that all of us can play a part in. And my goal is to get queer people listed in with those D&I efforts. But yeah, that's kind of my 3 takeaways for today. I really appreciate everyone coming in today, and thank you, Dougie Fresh, for having me on.
Thank you, Matthew. This has been really awesome. Really, what I'm hearing is it's all about respect. Mm-hmm. Really, it's come down to that item right here, right now. The truth of the matter is I'm listening to it, I'm like, humans are complex. And we are all, and that complexity creates a challenge for us. And when we face challenges, we get growth. So as leaders, we don't want to look at this world of like, okay, I've solved all of what I've decided to gather about information and humanity at large, and no more information can be adapted. No, life is about continuing education credits. We do this for our careers at large, and we've got to do this with the people around us because the world is complex, and that's a beautiful thing because it creates growth. So, I mean, my question to you is, why should companies even make the effort? Especially because, things are changing, and they will change and continue to change through time. Why should a company even make the efforts?
Totally, yeah. So, I mean, there's been a lot of research that has demonstrated, like, if the more expansive and inclusive your diversity and inclusion efforts are, the more you're going to attract talent. So, for example, if you look at Gen Zs and millennials, research has shown it's through Universum, UNIVERSIUM. They go through and they poll students from across the nation about what they're looking for in work. And the top 3 things that come up for students, no matter industry, no matter what they're looking at, is one of the top 3 is being inclusive and diverse. So for a company to really recruit that next generation of talent, the millennials, the Gen Zs, they have to demonstrate inclusion. You also can look at data for youth. There's a lot more youth identifying as non-binary or genderqueer. So you have to think about that group that's coming through, right? So completely reworking and making sure you're hitting on queer identities in your diversity and inclusion efforts is going to help your recruitment. It's going to help your branding, but it's also going to help your productivity. And that's really what employers have to realize, is that diversity and inclusion isn't just checking a box. And it's also not about just checking a box for the data you can collect. It's about really throwing yourself into the work and being ready for the work.
Really treating humans like humans, right? Instead of that.
Yeah, right. Novel idea, right? You wouldn't think it'd be that hard to understand, but I think sometimes it could be a little difficult for people to wrap their minds around.
I know, it's fascinating. Well, the thing is numbers in the concrete that's stagnant, like objects are so easy to wrap our minds around. Something that's moving and morphing and changing, and it's complex and layers and history and all this stuff, let alone like our subconscious belief systems and paradigms. That's complex. That can be hard. And that's, I think, understandable. And that's what makes life fun, right? So question for you, Matthew, is what would be the number one skill set? So not necessarily a quality that they just have, but a skill set that they actively use. What's the number one skill set of an inclusive leader? So thinking once again, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, what would be a skill set or an activity that you would pick up in a lineup of leaders? Like, wow, that person, because I see them doing X, Y, and Z thing, I would dare judge that they are a very inclusive leader and that people feel safe with them, or they feel more part of the tribe with them. What would you say is the number one skill set of an inclusive leader?
Yeah, I mean, from just the people I've worked with, I would say critical thinking and being able to see outside of yourself. So when I say that, when I'm in a group setting or I'm in a meeting, the people that tend to be the most amazing leaders, the most innovative, are the ones who, as we're having discussions about new programming or new onboarding, they're bringing up things like, oh, well, what about this? Like, is that, are there accommodations for, applicants with disabilities? Are there representations from a vast majority of minority students? So it's the people who think outside of their own view that's right in front of their face. And they immediately bring in that critical thinking of like, how will this be perceived? How will this be helpful to people across identity lines? And I would say those are by far the people that blow me away the most, that I love collaborating with. And they also tend to be the ones that honestly really have a drive and fire that makes it exciting to work with them. And so whenever I'm looking and working with someone who brings something up like that, or brings up something that we haven't talked about, maybe a blind spot of ours, that's where I'm like, that's the person I want to work with. That's the person who's going to go places, because they're going to be the person in the boardroom who is driving the conversation and also helping to shape the future of that company culture.
That's awesome. And I feel like as leaders, we want to be able to be aware of our blind spots and fill those blind spots with someone who brings those strengths in. And I believe, Matthew, that's what exactly you do. And you've actually offered any of our listeners here, whether you're participating live today or you're participating in the recording, Here is the offer. He has generously offered 30 minutes of his time. If you want some alternate perspective to look at some of your blind spots, either as a business owner or a manager or HR specialist or a D&I specialist, this is a great opportunity to get 30 minutes of consultation with Matthew. You should see a pop-up on your screen if you're coming in live. If you're coming in recorded, all you have to do is go to www.coachleadgrow.com/awesome. Naturally, sign up, and Matthew will reach out to you and schedule that 30-minute free consultation. Thank you so much for your generosity, and thank you for your input here today as you bring a great deal of perspective on leadership when it comes to inclusion in the workplace. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Stick around. If you have some questions, you can ask Matthew at the very end here today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Deb.
You're very welcome. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here I want to add in now the leadership twist here. What I really feel in preparation for today really all comes down to, in my opinion, it's safety. Do we feel safe in our world? And it's an individual question. It's also a societal question that we get to ask on a regular basis here. So I like to bring in the 3 keys to increase what I call them acceptance. We have self-acceptance, self-love, and yes, this is important. We got to start with ourselves first. But what about others? How do we see others differently in a way that they feel safe? The first thing I like to bring up here is to understand that we are hardwired for survival. Tribal membership, feeling accepted, part of the tribe, has a hardwired survival mechanism in our brain that have us making certain decisions, even on a subconscious level, that actually impact the people around us. So this idea of needing to be accepted, an accepted member of the tribe, is number one, the first thing we must identify. Now, this is not my first bullet point. It's just the foundation of the first bullet point here. Again, going back into history where we did literally live as tribes, as people. If you left the tribe, you were dead meat because it required every member of the tribe to survive, hunters, gatherers, nurturers, and so forth. We couldn't be all of those things. There was no Walmart of the tribe that you just walked in and got everything you possibly wanted, right? And so we still have this hard wiring of wanting to be accepted, wanting to be loved, wanting to be a member of the tribe, even especially in our own family unit, as well as the family unit that we create at large. And so things like acceptance and love is foundational to our survival, because if back in the tribal days, if we weren't accepted and loved by our family members, we could be, again, ousted from the tribe, seen as weak and not strong, and it's about the tribe survival. And so the tribes of today haven't really changed much from our ancient tribes. We have our Facebook tribe. If you want to know if you're part of a Facebook tribe, post a picture and then see how often you check that post again to see how many people liked it. Again, seeking approval and acceptance and love. We have our national tribe. Great example is when we go to the Olympics. We could be so divided as a nation. We go to the World Olympics and it's like USA, USA. We have our political tribes. We have our religious tribes, our sub-tribes within our communities, tribes of sports teams, of bands that we enjoy, pop stars, like all of this. We have our tribes. You're going back to RuPaul's Drag Race. The queens that you want to win, you form a tribe with everyone who agrees with that. So we get to understand, if we want to move towards more them acceptance, and this includes ourselves, we must recognize that we are hardwired in this survival mindset to seek acceptance from others and seek membership to a tribe. Now, we are very unique. It's not about we're all the same. We're all accepted. Everybody gets a trophy. We're all very unique. That's a given. But understand that as human beings, we want to be accepted. And if you want to be a powerful leader, it's about seeing, number one, how the mind operates, and that this is hardwired into our lives. And this leads to number 2 point. Number 2 point is we seek to be accepted in 1,000 different ways. Amy Edmondson coined this term psychological safety. You've probably heard this has been a really big buzzword in business. Psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. This is huge in the workplace, that we are in an environment that we feel psychologically safe. Now, this is a layer above, like physical safety and so forth. When we talk about inclusion, diversity, and when we talk about people going out and protesting, it's about us wanting and longing for safety. It's somewhere where we're not feeling safe, and we want to start a dialogue that has just been cut off, right? But in the workplace and in our home environment, psychological safety is huge. And we seek information that tells us that we are safe in thousands and thousands of different ways. The problem is, for many of us, if we do not feel safe in our environment, our work environment, what we have to do is we have to walk in each and every day preparing for any and all possible catastrophe, right? It's like venturing off into the Amazon jungle and having to prepare for snakes and spiders. And, you know, I've got to have an axe, maybe a machete, and I've got to have a tent, of course, and water. And I don't know what to expect because I don't have experience in this area, or it's so unknown or seemingly chaotic or unaccepting that I got to prepare for everything. So imagine for a moment, each and every day, one person you loved and cared about walked into work feeling like this. They had to prepare for any and all outcomes at any given time. I mean, imagine you being that person, that each and every day you didn't know what to expect, what you could share, what you couldn't share, and how would that alter your level of productivity, creativity, connectivity with others? If we've got that weight on our shoulders, it makes it much more challenging for us to really thrive in our environments. And again, psychological safety is not like handling everyone with kitten gloves. We still have accountability. You still have productivity. You know, we're still going to work for a job, but the way we include others' thoughts and ideas it really does matter. And what Matthew earlier mentioned, you know, we are really complex in the intersectionality of all of us. We have so many parts of our identity. The things that are really important, we're going to be looking to say, is that person safe? Can I join their tribe? And so it's important for us to recognize that. Now, Dr. John Gottman, he's a professor of psychology at the University of Washington. He's been known for being the guy when it comes to understanding relationships and whether a marital relationship will work out or not. Now, we're all in different modes of relationships, and he talks a lot about how we invest in others. And he brings us down to a term he calls bids. That relationships are a series of an exchange of bids. They're basically requests to be seen, layered with some kind of unspoken question asking, am I valued, right? And so a bid can be as simple as a smile when you're passing somebody by. It could be a text message to a friend. A bid could be a post on social media. It can be a bid simply is in the form of a resume. We submit that. A bid is a hello, a goodbye, whatever it is. It's just basically a request to be seen. We do this 1,000 different ways. He says basically there are 3 responses to bids. One response is when somebody turns away. Take something typical maybe in the workplace. Somebody says, they look out the window like, man, it's a beautiful day today. The person they talk to, that's a bid for attention. Like, hey, I'm recognizing that I want to communicate about something, so I'm going to pick something very neutral like the weather, and I'm going to communicate it to you to see if you see me, hear me, and validate me if I'm a member of your tribe. And that person turning away would look like something like, and then they move on with the conversation. Means they don't necessarily recognize it, they don't really feed it, they don't really push against it, but it's just a, yeah, and then we move on, right? Then you have what is called turn against. This is where somebody bids for attention, like, oh, it's a beautiful day today. And somebody goes, oh, are you kidding me? It's so hot. I hate the heat. And even though we're voicing our opinion in that moment, what we didn't recognize is that person just basically said, I wanted to find something common for us to talk about so I can connect with you. And what you did is, no, I don't agree with you. That doesn't matter. You know, and so turning against here says that, you know, I'm not investing in you. What you're saying does not have value to me. It's not to say we can't voice our opinion. It's just we got to be aware of how we go about doing this. The truth is, in the work environment, when people feel valued, when they feel seen, they tend to work more. I like to say when people feel worth more, they tend to work more. When people feel worth less, they tend to work less. And we do this again in an employment situation in thousands of different ways. So the third way is actually turning towards is, hey, it's a nice day outside. And somebody says, oh my gosh, yeah, I've been inside all day. I haven't noticed. It's beautiful. What do you love about this weather? Or it's like, you know, I don't care for the heat so much, but you seem to enjoy it. What do you care about? What do you love so much about the weather? Meaning I can still voice my opinion and say, okay, tell me what matters to you. And so turning towards means we choose to respond to these bids in a warm and inviting way. Like, Like that person is the most important person in this moment, showing that we simply value them. All right. So number one is just simply recognize that we all have the tribal mind, right? Number two is to invest in others. And we can do this simply by paying attention to bids for attention that people have. And we're bidding each other all the time. And sometimes their bid might sound a little bit abrasive at first. You know, maybe they're voicing their opinion about something they've seen in society or on the news right now. And it may sound abrasive. It's still a bid for attention. And how do we respond in a way that we're turning towards and saying, I see you, I value you, and so that we can increase that level of psychological safety. Dr. John Gottman, he said, when it comes to relationships, we learned that husbands headed for divorce disregard their spouse's bids for attention or connection 82% of the time. That's a big chunk of the time. So 82% of the time between spouses, if you are rejecting their bids for attention, not looking good, according to the Relationship Cure, Dr. John Gottman. Says, while spouses in a stable relationship disregard their spouse's bids just 19% of the time, meaning of 100 bids for attention, even ignoring, 20% of those, a little less than 20% of those, you're still good. You don't have to be perfect. And this is the same is true in the workplace and in our life day to day. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be hypersensitive to that. Like, was that a bid? Was that a bid? Are you bidding me now? Is this happening? We don't have to be hypersensitive to that. Just be more aware of that, because we're seeking that inclusion. We're seeking to be accepted. My third point here, and the final point, is increasing kindness, empathy, and compassion. This is not simply just being nice. Nice is what my mom told me to do when growing up when you're interacting with a stranger. You got to be nice. Nice is how I want you to see me. Kindness is how I want you to feel with me. Now, again, I can't control how you feel, but if I truly want to be kind and show up as kind, it matters that you feel included and safe with me. Nice says, I care about what you think about me, so I'm going to put on a facade, and it may be genuine, that's fine. But kindness is different. Kindness goes down to this level of, I feel for you, I empathize with you, and we want to do this in every one of our interactions. So kindness is when we humanize others. And we think about, okay, maybe they're just all doing the best they can, and that maybe we are doing the best we can, because we can show kindness and empathy towards ourselves as well. There was a study of over 1,500 leaders from more than 300 organizations. And this professor of development in these organizations that pulled the study, a company called Development Dimensions International, Kim Cameron, she says that they identified the number one core driver of overall performance in organization was empathy, or is empathy. She said the payoff for things like compassion, kindness, and empathy is in the neighborhood of 15% increase in shareholder value, a 15% increase of really dollars and cents. When here are these tools, as I went back talking with Matthew, we joke around of like treating people like people, treating humans like humans. It's novel, but it's amazing how far we can get by just empathizing. Short, brief story, and then we'll wrap up here. There's a story of a 46-year-old industrial engineer who was seated in first class on an airplane. He watched as a mother walked down the aisle with a baby who had some kind of breathing challenge as she sat back and coach. And he thought, that mom clearly is going through something right now, and maybe she'd be more comfortable with this child in first class. And many people on the plane saw this mom wrestling with this baby wearing some kind of oxygen mask, likely with a tinge of sympathy, like, oh, that seems like it would be challenging. But here he put his empathy into action and had compassion as he stopped one of the stewardess and the flight attendants and basically said, hey, would it be okay if I swapped seats with her? And that he did. He put his sympathy into action and had compassion and empathy in that moment. And where can we do that more in our lives is simply understand that we all have this drive to be accepted. How do we recognize those bids for attention and turn towards more often than we turn against or turn away, and simply treat others with kindness, put ourselves in their shoes, knowing that everyone's doing the best they can with the situation, the circumstance they have, including ourselves, and really rise and lead others with a greater deal of compassion and empathy there. I'd like to offer everyone here today an opportunity, if you'd like, is what I call the wall buster session. It's an opportunity for us to sit down and identify some of the challenges that you're currently facing and talk them through. Maybe it's a level of psychological safety and how do I navigate this? Maybe it's a certain challenge that's holding you back. If you are interested in that, you'll see a pop-up on your screen that says hook me up, and simply sign up. It'll direct you to my calendar. You can go ahead and schedule an appointment right now or shortly after today. So again, if you have some questions, this is a great opportunity for you to enter in some questions in the chat window. If you're paying attention recorded here today, if you're watching the recorded webcast, you can simply go to coachleegrow.com/wall-buster and sign up for that as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is our review. So if I may invite Shane and Matthew both on once again. As we summarize the points of today, I'd like to ask one question of my two presenters. My question to you is, what is it that our viewers could do today in the next 5 minutes to take your advice and put it into practice? I'll start first, but what's one item that somebody could do immediately that would take 5 minutes or less to either gain greater awareness or actually take action on the advice you've shared today? For me, for those of y'all who are listening, I would encourage you to simply be aware of bids for attention. You don't have to do anything about it at this point, but simply be aware. If it's helpful, put an elastic band around your wrist, just as a little reminder of something kind of as a nuisance, to bring that to the forefront of your mind, to understand that people around us, they're bidding for attention and is seeking to be validated in all times. And how can we do that just a little bit more today? So this would be putting an elastic band around your wrist and just being aware of the bids for attention. Shane, what's one thing that my listeners can do here today to put what they have learned from you to work?
So I think a period of self-reflection. So taking 5 minutes to really sit with yourself and think about how you define your leadership, your humanity. I really love what you said about humanity, and finding the humanity in each other is what ultimately will lead to kindness. So like finding how you identify. So sitting here within myself and thinking and reflecting about how I define myself, words would come up such as, being an innovator. I like to see myself as an innovator. I like to see myself as a caring, happy-spirited person, right? So define yourself. Take 5 minutes and just define who you are, and realize that tomorrow you may be feeling different words, and that's okay. Like, that's part of defining who you are each day and then living in that.
I love the full permission to be okay with tomorrow being something slightly different or grossly different. Thank you. That's beautiful. Matthew, for you, what's one takeaway, something that somebody could do immediately following today's session?
Can I give two?
All right.
No.
It's not okay. Yes, we've got time. Let's do it.
So the first one I would say is I really want everyone who's listening, who's live, is to go and look at your applications for your company, because I think you'll be really surprised to see how uninclusive it is. But if it is inclusive, that is a great job. That means you have HR people who are really working to change the culture. So I'd really love for you to go do that. And also for those listeners, so I have actually worked close with Shane, whichever way he is on here. Campus Pride is amazing. They are a nonprofit, so I would encourage you to donate to Campus Pride, whether that be funds, time, anything you can do to help them out. They do amazing work with queer students in colleges and universities, and he's honestly one of the reasons that I am really an advocate on behalf of queer people, and one of the driving forces of me feeling empowered, honestly, just to be like, I'm queer, I'm here, let's make some stuff happen. So.
I love it. Thank you to both of you for being on today and sharing your expertise. It has helped me personally in a phenomenal way, and just expanding my view of leadership. And that's the point of Leadership in 3D today, and in our future podcasts and webcasts, is to help us to expand our idea of leadership. Leadership is not a title. It's not a promotion. It is a mindset, and beautiful, Shane, as you said, it's for us to define and then go out and be that, live by that.